I'm not aware of any argument that outside of essentially the Communist Manifesto for the
Yeah.
government operating schools.
Yeah,
So
government schooling is included in the communist planks in the Communist Manifesto. But the so-called economic argument that you'll hear people perpetuate, it's a myth when it comes to the government school system. They'll say the government needs to run schools because it's a quote-unquote public good. It's more like a public bad in places like Baltimore, where they have 40% of their high schools with 0% proficiency rates in math. Zero kids in 40% of their public schools having proficiency in math. It's a total clown show. It's a disaster. It's a dumpster fire. That is not a public good. But the argument they'll say is that the two conditions of a public good is that it has to be non-rivalrous and non-excludable, according to the economics definition.
right, so this would be like the national
Public schools are
parks.
both of those things. They are excludable, and they also are rivalrous in consumption. So, and evidence for this is that private schools exist. It is not a public good. You don't have a free rider problem. You can limit it to payers. And look, public schools do exclude on the basis of zip code as well. So they aren't just excludable, they do exclude. And even Milton Friedman wrote about this in 1955 in The Role of Government in Education in his essay, where he pointed out that even if there were positive externalities of schooling, which, by the way, schooling is not the same thing as education, you can get a good education outside of those walls. And there's a lot of negative externalities of schooling too, where you might learn that it's cool to be in a gang, it's cool to do drugs. And I had a lot of those influences in my government school experience growing up in San Antonio, Texas, in my middle school. We'd play this game called 10 Seconds. That was the cool thing to do. You fight for 10 seconds, and then that was the end of the game. I mean, we had kids getting rolled into the gang in the bathroom. That was the cool thing. I didn't do it. I didn't fall through the cracks, but kids do fall into the cracks when they're surrounded by that for long periods of time, for several years. And that's not a public good. That's a public bad. They're better off being at home with their parents, not being around these influences. But all that to say, Milton Friedman pointed out that even if we all agreed that there were net positive externalities of schooling, that it was a great thing to do, and that what he means by externalities is that there are benefits to people who don't directly engage in the transaction. So it's beyond what the kid experiences. It's beyond what the school or provider's experiencing. Is that these third parties, the rest of society, benefits if everybody's super educated. I would say, one, the kind of individuals that the government school system is churning out is not a benefit for third parties. We saw what happened with the riots in over the past few years, mostly peaceful protests. I think teaching kids to not like each other based on immutable characteristics and dividing kids in the government school system, that is leading to negative externalities, not positive externalities. But even if we agreed that everything was positive, that this was a good environment, Milton Friedman pointed out that that doesn't necessarily imply that government should be running the schools. That would only imply that there might be some benefit of having taxpayers fund a certain portion of schooling at the K through 12 level. And even then, there's no reason why we should structure it where we're funding government schooling for everybody, including Bill Gates's kids.
Right.
I mean, the argument for food stamps is that there's a benefit of having a well-fed populace, and that we don't want people starving. But then do we say, oh, let's give food stamps to Bill Gates? No, we say it should just be for the least advantaged who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. And so you could imagine a society, if we started from scratch, where with education, we'd have education stamps. They'd all be private providers. You don't need the government to run the institutions. And you wouldn't need to fund it for the highest of incomes. You'd fund it for a small segment of the population. But these aren't policy proposals I'm arguing for right now. I understand the world that we live in today, and the best solution from a realistic standpoint is to have the funding we're already allocating to K through 12 fund the kid as opposed to the institution, to fund the student, not the system.
I think viewers have gotten a really robust understanding of what school choice is, of where it is in our country today, which is what your book is so good at. And what you've articulated here. This is a movement that's on the march. So I know that you're optimistic about it. You are an evangelist for school choice. So you are very much. I think that might even be in your Twitter handle, isn't it?
Right.
School choice evangelist. So I think that's pretty obvious. What has you most optimistic and excited, not just about school choice, but education, because in America, because school choice policy is exciting. It's exciting for me. The path of education in the country seems like it's on the ropes. And so is that the 1-2 step? How do you think about the future for the country and for education?
I'm most optimistic about the bipartisan future that we have on the front for school choice. In the book, in chapter 4, I highlight something that I call bipartisanship through hyperpartisanship. And it might sound counterintuitive right now. How can something so politically divisive actually be bipartisan or nonpartisan in the future? Well, it has to do with something, a little known reality, that politicians respond more to power than to logic or morality. And so the more that the GOP leans into parental rights as a political winner, the more it becomes a form of political suicide for Democrats to oppose it. And so we're seeing a lot of the things that I called in the book about this theory playing out in practice right now, where you have Democrats either signaling public support for school choice or they're even voting for it in places like Louisiana and Florida last year. 11% of the House Democrats in Florida voted for school choice, universal school choice. Again, that's not 90%, 100% where I'd like it to be, but it's a huge shift from where we've been before, where all Democrats have historically locked arms and fought against school choice. You have consequential votes in places like Nebraska this year. They passed their first school choice program. And guess what? In Nebraska, you need a 2/3 supermajority to break a filibuster. They needed 33 votes. They got 33 votes with the help of Justin Wayne, one of their main Democrats out there. He pointed out the hypocrisy of his colleagues for sending their kids to private school who wouldn't dare send their own children to the failing schools in his district in Omaha, Nebraska. And so that was courageous of him. In Louisiana, you have Representative Jason Hughes. He pointed out in a powerful speech on the House floor that he didn't care if he lost his job over this. This was too important. This vote to expand opportunities for less advantaged families to have school choice, this vote was too important. It wasn't worth selling his soul to the teachers' unions. And so that was important. Jason Hughes is a big supporter of school choice in Louisiana. In Missouri this year, they had a few votes from Democrats voted for their big expansion of school choice this year in Missouri. In Georgia this year, they passed their first education savings account program, money following the child. After Governor Brian Kemp called for it to come to his desk, this is the first time any Georgia governor has done so, called for a private school choice bill to come to their desk during their State of the State address early on in the year. He was the first one to do so. A Democrat was a consequential vote and voted for the bill to enact their first education savings account program. Just after last year, Misha Maynor, a Democrat, flipped parties as a sitting legislator to become a Republican on the issue of school choice in particular. So again, a lot of the things I talk about, it seems like it's partisan because it's the Republicans winning on the issue, but in order for things to change, in order for the incentives to align for politicians to do the right thing, you have to have one party. I don't care if it's the Republicans or the Democrats. If the Democrats were leading on the issue, I would applaud them for doing so. The Republicans in that other scenario would have an incentive to come along as well. Currently, since the Republicans are winning on the issue, the Democrats are scratching their heads and saying, you know what? We got to listen to this new interest group, the parents, the kids union. If we don't want to continue bleeding votes on the issue, we got to do the right thing. And so now you have people like Josh Shapiro, J.B. Pritzker signaling public support for private school choice. And again, you might not like these people for a lot of other reasons, but it's good news for families in the end that you have powerful politicians from both parties feeling compelled to outmaneuver themselves to fight for school choice.
If you like this clip, you should check out the full video and all the other great content we've got at Dad Saves America. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss our new stuff as it drops each week.